Yep, so I'm going to talk about APTs, and I'll explain why in a second. But who I am, so I'm Jason, I work at PwC, don't all boo us at once. I used to work for the Australian Signals Directorate. I used to do stuff on the internet for the government. I'll let you work out what that is later. I also used to work for the CrowdStrike Borg a very long time ago when Overwatch was like 3 or 4 people. So that dates me. I'm on CRESS, which is basically just an Intel community kind of function, does pen testing stuff as well. I used to be a Russia analyst, so I used to do real work. I used to do the stuff that Tristan and Matt do. Now I just push papers and talk a lot about ransomware, because all I do is waterproof things. So, Q, I want to talk about other things than ransomware. So I work in a team of 35 globally. Our job is to help clients find all the bad stuff on the internet. So we've got some desks, they do China-based stuff, they look at Russia-based stuff, Iran, North Korea, all the fun kind of things. We look at about 27 different countries from a threat actor perspective. I also want to look a bit broader than just Australia, because normally I get called in and people go, Jason, tell me what the threats to the Australian organisations are, and I just have to say ransomware and then maybe a little bit of OT stuff. And that gets tiring after you've done it 700 times a year. So, I'm going to walk through some case studies that we've had a look at. So, we're going to talk a little bit about some Chinese APTs. And if anybody has been doing this long enough and knows what PlugX is, I did not want to be speaking about it in 2023, but here we are. I'll talk a little bit about that. I'll talk a little bit about some cool Russia stuff that we've been seeing, and then I'll finish off with some Iran. A little bit different to some of the other conversations you've had today. This is more just a show and tell. So I'll go from there. Duncan did a talk last year about doing slide animations and transitions, so I've just liberally put some in just to annoy him a little bit. But look, I'm going to start with something we call Red Ledge, which is Mustang Panda. So they are probably a China-based threat actor, probably. They do a lot of stuff. They've been pretty active. A couple of years ago, they were using a dropper tool called APT, which basically just builds a nice weaponized Word document that you can email to people. What we see them doing now, we'll talk through in a little bit, but 2020 to 2021, they had a really big interest in like the Vatican and anything to do with religious stuff. So Southeast Asia, Europe, pretty heavy targeting of that stuff. And what they would do though, is they would use zip archives and then put that into, put a word executable in there with a nice decoy name, something like Catholic Church meeting minutes or something similar to that. We see a lot of that kind of stuff. And then they would do some classic DLL side loading. So very different to hijack order, so side loading is a specific technique they'd use. And that's how they got away with a lot of stuff, had some success with that. January to March, they decided to change things up. They went with zip with an executable, kind of novel, who opens executables these days. Turns out a lot of people in Southeast Asia do that. So what we would typically see here, the slight difference here is before it would literally just be PlugX. They wouldn't even try and obfuscate the fact that it's PlugX. PlugX has been around for like donkey's years. It's very capable, it's a very good tool, gives you lots of fun stuff to do. But what we saw them do is start to use this thing called a Trident loader. So basically just a way of loading all of their stuff, goes out, does some side loading, pulls out a DLL, etc. Usually from the internet. Or from the zip file if it's in there. So super easy to do, but they tried that for a couple of months. That worked for them. And then what we typically see after that is a couple of months later, they try something different. Because what they're seeing is people start to blog about this stuff. People talk about Mustang Panda or Red Ledge all the time. It's a very popular thing on the blogs. So we see them chop and change around. So in April, March, May, those kind of time periods, we see them do some stuff with link files. So they've gone from, okay, well, zips with X's weren't working for us anymore because somebody blogged about it. So then we start to try and we'll do link files. That's usually pretty successful. The link file looks like it's a PDF, you open it, and off to the races. And again, always using this Trident loader. Then ISOs with link files. So they would send an ISO attached in an email and use that to do it. So another kind of change. Mark of the web comes in, and they're now not able to use kind of Word documents and stuff like that. So what they start to do is do a little bit different. They go with HTML files. This is kind of the cool stuff now, so they're starting to change away from how they were being lazy before. So I consider the first 4 bits really lazy. Like if you have to zip an executable and send it to somebody and hope that the victim's going to double click on that and then double click on the exec and run it, that's pretty lazy. But it's really effective. And so all of this stuff moving forward, so the first bit at the beginning is kind of Catholic communities, religious targeting. All of this new stuff is against Europe now. So they've kind of got a tasking order from somebody in a particular government's going, hey man, really super interested in Europe right now. I mean, I can't imagine why in January 2022 you'd start getting tasking orders for Europe. Interesting. Ministry of Foreign Affairs type stuff, right? And so, we see that, but yeah, mark of the web comes in, HTML with a zip, still does the same stuff, still drops the Trident loader. So pretty consistent techniques all the way through. Much more interesting than ransomware because the impact is very different. I think we spent a lot of time talking about the impact of ransomware, but when you think about it from an espionage perspective, it's all very different. It's things like, well, somebody stole my documents, but hey, I've still got all my servers working. So it's kind of slightly different in that perspective. One of the things I said I would talk about is kind of TTPs and detection opportunities for them. So these are like the most common TTPs that this threat actor uses. Like all of their stuff is around kind of getting domains and stuff that look really, I guess, usable. We'll go into a little bit of detail what it kind of looks like later. What they do to develop their own malware, it's pretty much a builder. These guys aren't really sophisticated enough to do it themselves. They are very good at using something that somebody has told them to use. So we would call this the quartermaster effect. Essentially, there's a guy from James Bond Q that sits in a basement in China somewhere and says like, hey, here are the tools you can go away and use. That's pretty much what they do. Spear phishing, we haven't seen them do much else but spearfish. So all the 365 stuff we were talking about before, perfect opportunity to find some of this stuff. PlugX is quite useful because it has built-in sandbox evasion and a few other bits and pieces. It does do some checks for this, so there's a Trident loader. They also do guardrails. So what they'll do is they'll profile first. So when Trident's dropping it down, it'll go away and say, actually, like, what am I looking at? What is this system? Is this a home system? Is this a test system? Is this Jason turning on his development laptop for the first time in a year or so and actually having a look at it? Probably. So that's kind of what they're looking for with the guardrails. And then post that, PlugX does a bunch of process discovery and other things. So that's the China angle covered. Let's jump to Russia, Jason's favourite subject. We've been looking at this threat actor. We call it the new kid on the block because nobody else has seemed to be blogging about it, which is kind of nice. It's pretty basic in terms of how it is, but they are very successful. So they are really, really interested in government agencies in Ukraine. Again, surprise. They use a lot of UKRnet themed, which is basically a government mail server type thing for the Ukrainian government. And they make lures like this. This is going to be repeated 100 times before the end of the conference or the end of my talk, but this page here, you'll see lots when you look at all the data sets for them. They have really bad OPSEC though. It's almost like they got told they needed to go and get into mailboxes and somebody, again, gave them a run sheet and then they just never changed it. So when they go and register domains and register infrastructure, it is literally the same infrastructure every single time. So it's the same hosting provider, it is the same subnet, so it's like real trivial to find these guys, but they're very successful. So we started looking at like the domain register, SSL certificates. If you put test in your SSL certificate, I am going to find you. That's one of the things they did slightly different in this case. But they did this thing where they use the same domain and then just chuck the target in front of it, which is super useful. So if you have like a way of searching for domains and you just put in, I don't know, star.gov.au.star, you'll pretty much find a whole bunch of stuff that we're targeting in Australia and vice versa. It's pretty common to do some of this stuff. But they just went through this programmatic list of just hitting every single administrative district. A bunch of these in Kiev, a bunch of these are in contested areas. Some of them are like way close to Poland. So it's got a variety of targeting, but there's always something interesting happening at those places. So we kind of kept an eye on it. We had a look at the phishing page. They're a big fan of bundle.css. So you can start to fingerprint them by that. So you start to map it to the same SSL certificate, to the same register, and then you get their other stuff. And then you'll notice a trend. They use desktop/security/login. So you start looking for that, and then your Maltego graph is like 100 entities wide, and you need a big screen to look at it. But again, all of these are running in the same block, same hosting provider, and they all have the same Apache servers running. So pretty much somebody has a script that goes, build me a server, I'll go register these domains and then deploy it. Off they go. I mean, templates are good, but if you want to get caught, they're really easy to find. So we came across a PDF containing one of the domains. Again, looks pretty similar to what I was showing you before. The gist of that translation is essentially, we found suspicious activity. Not that they are the suspicious activity, and they're really interested in getting access to your emails. If you don't respond and click the link, in 3 days we're going to block your account. Not going to happen, but when you do that, you come full circle to desktop security login. Again, change password to UKR, and you start to see the very familiar pages from before. So it all looks the same. You can, if you've got URL scan, you can just bang some of this. You can find this page, ukr.gov.ua, and then if you just search for others, you'll find their stuff as well. So again, another really easy, trivial way to find it. The problem is they might be really easy to find, but they are still very successful. They still get hits. We've seen some of the logs for some of these things, and people log in all the time. People send their credentials, so it's still pretty effective. And most of the time they're just after the emails. They don't want any access to servers themselves. They just want the data. So fairly straightforward. We then saw them start to do something slightly different. So I think their tasking may have changed. They were given some other things to go and look at. So they then started targeting the Greek Navy, and then a few other European entities, but all the same stuff. So if you can find this initial page, you can then navigate to the login screen, and then you can replicate that and find more of them. They literally just picked up the same infrastructure, the same setup, the same configs, and then went, now we're going to go target Greece. So pretty straightforward how they've been doing some of their stuff. All right, we're doing for tonight. Cool. 5 minutes, easy. Phishing techniques, common TTPs, phishing, funnily enough, and then JavaScript and some malicious things. The JavaScript is more about profiling the end systems, kind of make sure that you're actually who you say you are sometimes, but it's not super effective. All right, last one for the day. Yellow nicks and muddy water. I think the US government came out and said that they were the Ministry of the Interior, MOS, something like that, Iranian government. They do some fun stuff, but they also have really bad OPSEC as well. One of those things that they do is they forget to actually hide their open directories. The other part of the open directories fun is that if you can find them, they upload their raw intelligence reports that they are writing about the target to that open directory. So you can get some very fun intelligence reports if you speak Farsi. What they typically tend to do though, these guys, they use remote administration tools, which they have the credentials for. Typically you can buy them on the dark web for like $10 if you wanted to, and that's kind of how they get access to their targets, or they've spearfished them and got the creds from there. They also use some commercial stuff as well. Their TTPs change after people blog about them or their reports are published on them. So it's kind of, they are paying attention, they kind of do know who we are, they are looking at it, so fairly interesting from our perspective. When we find their open directories though, it's pretty much just open source tooling for days. So anything sysinternal tools even, stuff like that, and they'll run them on host as well. So yeah, that's kind of what Orion up to for some of their stuff. They do some bespoke stuff, but it's not fairly detailed. And like in the screenshot, you can see they've basically got a bunch of open source tools that they'll try and use as they go. But these guys are usually pretty successful as well. It just shows you don't have to be super sophisticated to be successful. And some techniques for them. Pretty straightforward, always cred dumping, keylogging, that kind of stuff. The keylogging is how they write their reports. So they basically just deploy a keylogger waiting for a bunch of keystrokes to happen, and then you'll see them start to draft their Word document with their report in it. So that's all fun. And that is it. That is your, I don't want to talk about ransomware, we went through everything that is APT at the moment. Questions?
So what steps do you normally take for attributing an attack to an APT, a specific APT, other than political context?
Yep, so we use diamond model for most of our attribution. You'll see Blue Dev 9 or 8, I can't remember which one it is off the top of my head at the moment. We do that when we don't really have a lot of solid attribution. We think it's probably somewhere in that region, and we just need to focus on it more, similar to Mandy and Spunk, the way they go do that. When we're trying to do attribution though, like we're not the government, we're not going to go super attribution and try and work it out. Occasionally we get really lucky and like people do stupid stuff like leak their GPS coordinates when they, or like they go and check the weather on a server, that kind of stuff. From our perspective, like we just try and make sure we've got enough stuff to create a group and say, yeah, this is what we're looking at. And then if we start to see similarities over time, then we'll group it together and go from there. But attribution's hard, and I'll leave that to the government. At the back?
Since the concept of the manual came, have you seen much use of that in phishing rescue?
Yes and no. Yes, we have seen a bit of it. Has it been successful? Probably not. Like, hopefully most people have just blocked it. That was kind of like our advice when it started to happen. But yeah, not so much by APTs. A lot of like commodity crime stuff, certainly using that. Like your ransomware affiliates and a few other bits and pieces, but yeah.
With the attribution stuff, are there any countries or groups that aren't raising regional, or we listed that North Korea, Russia and China? Are there any countries that probably aren't as well known as they're targeting Australia?
Yeah, well, targeting Australia or just in general?
Just in general.
Just in general?
Australia as well, yeah.
So we found a fun group that we're pretty sure is like a Bosnian threat actor, which was fun. Obviously like really locally interested in like Armenia and a few other places like that. That's kind of like the niche. Like we've got the 27, you start to get to the tail end and you're like, that's real niche. We probably won't look at that too much, but it's interesting nonetheless. I think the one thing we're not very good at talking about from an Australian targeting perspective is like, we do get hit quite a bit by like APTs, but we tend to talk a lot about ransomware, like Medicare, Optus, all that kind of, sorry, Medicare, Medibank, Optus, all that kind of stuff in the media, but nobody ever wants to talk about the fact that we've had one report in like a year from ACSC, like Volt Typhoon. After that, nothing. Like it's kind of like, well, there's more going on. We should probably talk about that a little bit more. That's my rant on attribution over. Yeah. One on the back.
Has you ever seen something like and then they try to get back from the cloud, but then on the back on the cloud you get the rest of where the cloud,
So from like a ransomware perspective, have we seen people like ransomware their cloud backups and stuff? Yeah, that happens fairly frequently, but it's because people don't have segregation in place. They're not thinking about, well, you know, that cloud storage, those cloud buckets, can they get to that kind of stuff? So we have seen it, but it's usually pretty detectable. I'm going to stop there, because I can see the next gen's ready to go.
Fine for one.
Fine for a bit? Cool.
Yeah.
I think it might be the last question then. Yep.
Who's the least lazy APT?
The least lazy. You're going to get a super biased answer, Bex, because it's me, and it's going to be Russia. So there's a couple of Russian threat actors that are like super sophisticated, and we don't hear a lot about them. So like 29, Turla, those kind of two groups, they are like very good at what they do, and not lazy at all. Like they very rarely make OPSEC mistakes when they do stuff. Go on.
And just to follow up to that, do you think that there's a relationship between the funding to those kinds of well-versed offset groups versus the more lazy ones?
Yes and no. So I think the well-funded ones obviously have better tooling, better capacity. They can do things like hire contractors to build their stuff, which provides like a layer of obfuscation. I will say though, if you don't have to spend a lot of money to be successful, why would you? If you can do that in other places. That's typically what we would see. So you know, there's obviously like very highly specific, like, you know, like TAO for example, right? Like they're like off with the fairies doing crazy stuff that's really well funded, and then you've got folks like some of the Chinese sets that basically do the same stuff they've been doing for 10 years because it still works. So why invest funding in that? Yeah. Cool. I'm going to finish now. Thanks, folks.